So here's a question that really gets you thinking. Can extreme poverty, something affecting hundreds of millions of people across the globe, actually be wiped out in our lifetime? I mean, really? And if it can, how? That powerful, maybe even wildly optimistic idea is what we're diving into today. We're taking a really close look at Jeffrey Sachs's big book, The End of Poverty: Economic Possibilities for Our Time. Our goal here is to give you a deep, thorough critique of this, frankly, hugely influential book. We'll focus on its main arguments, how people responded, but absolutely no spoilers about specific stories within it. And just so you know, for this deep dive, you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation. This is powered by Google's NotebookLM, which allows for a, well, deeper and more dynamic book critique.
Yeah, and Jeffrey Sachs, I mean, he's a major figure, a well-known development economist, a professor. He's advised governments on massive economic reforms, led the UN Millennium Project. Quite the resume. This book came out in 2005, which was, thinking back, a really interesting time. It was right in the middle of implementing the Millennium Development Goals. Remember those?
Oh, absolutely. There was a lot of optimism then.
Exactly. A sort of post-Cold War hope about countries working together using evidence to solve global problems. But it was also a time of really intense debate about foreign aid. Did it work? Was it the best tool?
And Sachs just jumps right into that debate, doesn't he? His main idea is incredibly bold.
It really is. He argues straight up that extreme poverty, and he defines that as living on less than $1 a day back then, could be completely gone globally by 2025.
Wow. By 2025. And how did he think that could happen?
Well, his solution relies on a few key things. Really targeted development aid, countries coordinating action globally, and policies based on what he calls clinical economics.
Clinical economics. Tell me more about that.
Think of it like a doctor diagnosing a patient. He argued each nation needs a specific diagnosis for its poverty barriers and then a tailored prescription, not a one-size-fits-all approach.
So the book isn't just economics, it's policy, it's advocacy too.
Definitely. It sits right at that intersection, development economics, policy analysis, but also a really passionate call for global justice.
Okay, let's unpack that main claim. Ending poverty by 2025. How does he support that? What's the evidence he puts forward?
Well, he really leans on planned international action being the key. And he gives examples, specific case studies. He talks about Poland, Bolivia, Malawi, places where interventions seem to work. He also points to the UN Millennium Development Goals themselves as a framework, lays out these detailed calculations about how much official development assistance, ODA, or foreign aid would be needed. And he draws on experiences from the Millennium Villages project, which he was heavily involved in, as sort of real-world proof of concept.
Okay, so case studies, UN goals, aid calculations, field projects. What was the immediate reaction from other experts looking at that evidence? Did it hold up?
Well, that's when you get the first big wave of criticism. The case studies are compelling, no doubt. But critics immediately jumped on the fact that the argument felt heavily reliant on these anecdotal or very specific interventions.
So not necessarily representative.
Exactly. The feeling was, okay, that worked there, but where's the robust, large-scale, cross-country statistical proof for such a huge universal claim? Can you really scale these isolated successes up to wipe out poverty everywhere based on this evidence alone?
Right. Okay, beyond the examples, he introduces this idea, the poverty trap theory. What's that about?
Ah, yes. That's core to his argument. The theory basically suggests some countries are just fundamentally stuck, like they're on the lowest rung of the economic ladder and simply can't climb up without a significant boost from the outside.
Stuck how? What keeps them there, according to Sachs?
He points to things like chronically low savings rates. People just don't have enough to save or invest. Also, rapid population growth that can eat up any small economic gains. And then there are more technical economic ideas, like non-convex production functions.
Okay, non-convex what now?
Yeah, it's jargon. But basically, it means a country's economy might need a big initial push, a critical mass of investment, just to get going, like a car that needs a huge shove to start rolling, not just a little bit of gas. Small efforts don't yield proportional results at the very bottom.
So it's not just a smooth climb, it requires a jump start.
That's the idea. And he's very specific. He even provides this number 54 item checklist of potential interventions, health, education, infrastructure, agriculture, showing the kind of comprehensive planned push he thinks is needed.
54 items. That's detailed. But what's the counter-argument to this whole poverty trap needing massive aid? Does everyone agree aid is the answer?
No, definitely not. And this is a major point of contention. Many critics look at the data, especially for Africa, which received vast amounts of aid over decades, and they say, look, we don't see strong, consistent evidence that all this aid actually produced the large-scale, sustained economic growth Sachs predicts.
So the aid went in, but the big growth didn't follow, at least not everywhere.
In many places, yes. That's the critique. It raises this really tough question. Does the aid actually break the trap? Or could it, in some situations, unintentionally create dependency or prop up systems that prevent organic growth? That's the heart of the counterargument.
Okay, this clinical economics idea seems really central and maybe where the debate gets most interesting. Can we dig into that a bit more? How does he see it working in practice?
Yeah, he really hammers this point, the need for a differential diagnosis. He uses the medical analogy constantly. A doctor wouldn't prescribe the same medicine to everyone, right? So he argues nations need specific economic plans tailored to their unique problems, geography, disease burden, infrastructure gaps, whatever it is. And he uses this to criticize the kind of standard, often uniform policy packages that institutions like the IMF and World Bank used to push, the structural adjustment programs. He felt they often ignored crucial local context.
That medical analogy makes intuitive sense, but applying it to whole countries, are there risks? What do critics say?
Well, that's exactly it. While the analogy is powerful, critics raise a serious flag about what they sometimes call technocratic hubris. The danger, they argue, is that this very top-down, expert-led approach, well, it might underestimate just how important local politics are.
The messy human stuff.
Precisely. And existing institutions, social structures, and maybe most importantly, the agency of the people living there. Do the experts always know best? Or does this approach risk sidelining local knowledge and priorities? That's the tension.
Sachs also really pushes rich countries on their aid promises, their ODA commitments. What's his argument for why they need to step up?
He makes a very strong case for major investments in the basics, education, healthcare, infrastructure like roads and power. And he does the math. He shows that the aid levels rich countries had already pledged, if actually delivered, were theoretically enough to fund the poverty reduction goals outlined in the MDGs.
So it wasn't necessarily about finding new money.
His point was largely no. It was about fulfilling existing promises. The resources were notionally there, on paper at least.
Okay, nationally there. If the money was pledged, what's the practical problem? Why didn't it just happen?
The eternal challenge. Actually getting countries to deliver the full amount they promise and getting it delivered on time, consistently. History shows that's incredibly difficult. Pledges get cut, budgets change, delays happen. It's a major practical hurdle between the promise and the impact on the ground.
To make his case for big goals being possible, Sachs often brings up past successes, right? Like the Green Revolution or eradicating smallpox.
Yes, he uses those historical examples quite effectively. The Green Revolution dramatically increased food production in Asia. Smallpox was wiped out through global cooperation. He holds these up as proof that humanity can achieve ambitious goals when there's concerted action and scientific know-how.
They are inspiring examples, but do the critics buy that comparison?
The counter is that while, yes, those were amazing achievements, they aren't always easily replicated. Critics argue that the very specific factors, the science, the politics, the context that made the Green Revolution or smallpox eradication successful might be quite different from the complex, multi-layered challenge of ending poverty across vastly different countries and cultures.
So what worked for a specific disease might not be a template for fixing complex economies globally.
That's the cautionary note. Overlooking context is risky when you're trying to generalize solutions. To really get a handle on this book, it helps to distinguish between different kinds of claims Sachs makes. What does he seem to know based on evidence? What does he understand about the systems? And what's more like a strong opinion or even a prediction?
Okay, like that 2025 deadline.
Exactly. That bold prediction, ending extreme poverty by 2025, if the world just follows his plan, that's really presented more as a conviction, an opinion based on his analysis, maybe a goal to strive for. It wasn't, verifiable knowledge like a scientific fact. But the book is packed with things that fall more into the knowledge category. Descriptions of past aid projects, detailed definitions of poverty, data on ODA flows, analysis of why some past efforts failed. That's based on empirical observation and data.
And then there's understanding. How does the book show that?
I think it really shines in demonstrating a deep understanding of how different factors, technical issues, institutional weaknesses, even geography, all tangle together to keep countries poor. That clinical economics idea, whatever its flaws, shows real systems thinking. It tries to grasp the interactions.
What about wisdom? Does the book offer wisdom?
That's a fascinating question. There's definitely an aspirational wisdom there. It calls out injustice, emphasizes equity, and conveys this powerful sense of ethical urgency. That feels wise. But critics might argue that practical wisdom, or perhaps humility, is sometimes lacking, especially when it comes to appreciating the sheer complexity of the political and social obstacles to making large-scale aid work perfectly on the ground. It's that gap between the ideal plan and the messy reality.
And really digging into those kinds of nuances, knowledge versus understanding versus wisdom, that's exactly the kind of thing we explore on Mindful Moments. That's our YouTube channel, using AI for book analysis, summaries, critiques, trying to encourage that kind of reflection and rational thinking about big ideas.
It's crucial for books like this.
Okay, shifting gears a bit to the ethics. Sachs makes a strong moral case, essentially saying we should treat the basic needs of everyone on the planet as seriously as our own. That sounds like the golden rule, basically.
It absolutely aligns with that principle of moral reciprocity. Yes, treat others as you'd wish to be treated. It's a powerful ethical foundation for his call to action.
But does the proposed solution, the aid-centric approach, raise any ethical concerns itself?
It does, and this is a really important critique. There's an inherent ethical asymmetry that can arise. Even with the best intentions, large-scale aid programs risk setting up a dynamic where donors are the active agents, the ones with the power and resources, and recipients become, well, somewhat passive.
The saviors and the saved.
That's the risk. It can lead to dependency, sure, but also a kind of paternalism. Even Sachs's clinical economics, which tries to be context-specific, often results in solutions designed and driven by external experts and donors. This can mean imposing priorities that aren't actually the top priorities for the local communities themselves. Critics like Dambisa Moyo or William Easterly have used strong terms for this, like authoritarian paternalism.
Authoritarian paternalism.
Right.
That's a striking phrase, meaning experts deciding what's best, potentially overriding local voices.
Essentially, yes. A top-down approach where external actors, however well-meaning, can end up dictating reforms and marginalizing local democratic processes or self-determination. It's a serious ethical consideration about how help is given.
If we think about broad principles, maybe like the goals in the U.S. Preamble, promoting general welfare, establishing justice, how does the book stack up?
It's interesting to view it through that lens. The book clearly aims to promote the general welfare by focusing intensely on basic human needs. And it definitely targets distributive justice by trying to alleviate poverty. But procedural justice can be an issue if the methods are too top-down. As we said, who decides? Does it ensure domestic tranquility? Maybe, by reducing poverty-fueled unrest. But poorly managed external intervention could also create new tensions.
What about security or liberty?
Well, addressing deep poverty arguably helps provide for the common defense by tackling roots of instability. But the big challenge comes with secure the blessings of liberty. If technocratic solutions imposed from outside undermine a nation's ability to chart its own course, that poses a real challenge to self-determination and liberty.
Let's look at the logic of the arguments themselves. Are there any potential fallacies or weaknesses critics point to?
One that comes up frequently is the risk of hasty generalization. As we touched on before, taking those specific success stories, Poland, a millennium village, and assuming the same model will work universally for global poverty. That's a logical leap that needs more rigorous, broad-based evidence than the book sometimes provides.
So, generalizing from too few, potentially unrepresentative examples.
Precisely. We need to be cautious about assuming what works in one specific context will be a silver bullet everywhere else.
Are there other logical issues raised?
Yeah, a few others. Some see a false dilemma being presented. It's framed as either you embrace this kind of large-scale technocratic aid plan, or you're basically resigning yourself to continued poverty. That tends to downplay the huge range of other possibilities, including more organic, locally driven solutions or different types of international cooperation.
So it's not just plan A or nothing.
Critics would say no. There's a whole alphabet of options and complexities being ignored. There's also sometimes an appeal to authority, where the argument relies a bit heavily on Sachs's own considerable expertise or the credibility of institutions like the UN, perhaps in place of stronger statistical data for certain core claims. And maybe, most fundamentally, some argue there's an unsound premise regarding the primary cause of persistent poverty. The book emphasizes the poverty trap model lack of resources. Critics argue it significantly underestimates the absolutely massive role that bad governance, corruption, and weak institutions play, suggesting that just pouring in more money might not fix the problem if those underlying issues aren't addressed.
That makes sense. If the system itself is broken, more money might just leak out or be misused.
Exactly. It might not reach the people it's intended for, or create sustainable change.
Okay, so thinking longer term then. What's the wisdom assessment? What are the potential long-run consequences, good or bad, of relying heavily on this aid-centric approach? Socially, for instance.
Socially, the big concerns are, as we've mentioned, the risk of fostering long-term dependency on outside help, which can, in turn, undermine local institutions. Why build your own tax system if aid covers the budget? And potentially stifle local initiative and entrepreneurship.
And economically, does the big aid push always lead to sustainable growth?
Economically, the evidence is mixed, as we discussed. Large aid inflows might not generate the expected growth if a country simply can't absorb and use it effectively. Economists talk about absorptive capacity limits. Plus, large flows can increase risks of corruption or inefficiency if oversight is weak.
Beyond the material, is there a spiritual or, say, human dignity dimension?
That's a deeper, perhaps harder to measure aspect. But yes, the concern is that focusing only on material interventions, food, medicine, money, might neglect equally important human needs related to community, purpose, meaning, and dignity. Does development feel like something being done to people or something they are part of creating? So putting it all together, you could argue there's a potential lack of maybe prudence. The moral urgency in the book is incredibly powerful and clear, but critics argue there isn't always enough careful attention paid to the potential unintended negative consequences, the adverse side effects of these large-scale donor-driven interventions.
So to wrap things up, let's try to balance the scales. Sachs's book clearly has major strengths.
Absolutely. Its biggest strength is probably that clear, powerful moral urgency it conveys about fighting poverty. It really galvanizes attention. It also offers a coherent, actionable framework for thinking about global poverty reduction, which was needed.
And it shows a complex understanding of poverty, right? Not just income.
Yes, it definitely demonstrates a sophisticated grasp of how multiple factors, health, education, geography, infrastructure, all interact. That systems thinking is a strength, and it provides concrete, specific prescriptions for where investment should go.
Okay, but then the weaknesses. What are the main counterpoints?
Well, as we've discussed, the empirical support for the core poverty trap idea and the direct link between massive aid and sustained growth is weaker than the book sometimes suggests, according to many studies. There's also the significant criticism that it underestimates the crucial role of good governance, strong institutions, and genuine local ownership and agency in driving development, which connects to the risks of aid dependency we talked about.
And the practical side.
And finally, the huge implementation challenges remain. Getting the political will, ensuring the resources actually flow consistently, and achieving truly meaningful community involvement on the ground. Those are persistent, massive hurdles.
Right. So this really leaves us and you, the listener, with some big unresolved questions to chew on. Like, can these kinds of top-down aid initiatives ever really replace or foster organic, homegrown institutional change? Or are they always just a temporary fix?
And how do we genuinely empower local communities? How do we ensure development efforts avoid that trap of paternalism, however well-intentioned?
Is aid, maybe in some contexts, actually fueling problems like dependency or corruption? Could it be stifling local innovation by making it easier to rely on handouts than to build local businesses?
And looking ahead, how will huge global shocks think pandemics, think climate change? How will they reshape poverty? Will these existing frameworks even be adequate for the challenges to come?
Lots to think about.
Definitely. The bottom line is, The End of Poverty is, without doubt, a landmark book. It's hugely important for its moral call to action and its contribution to development thinking. But it really must be read alongside the critical perspectives. You need those voices emphasizing the hard empirical evidence, the absolute necessity of institutional capacity and good governance, the importance of democratic self-determination, and crucially, centering local agency. That's how we get towards truly sustainable, equitable solutions. And for more deep dives like this one, exploring different angles on important books and ideas, definitely check out Mindful Moments and our podcasts.
And just as a final note, the critique we've discussed today wasn't just pulled out of thin air. It was developed using a systematic framework that draws on a wide range of perspectives, foundational texts and development, macro-level critiques, specific African viewpoints, evidence-based alternative approaches, and philosophical wisdom, all to ensure a thorough and fair evaluation. Click the link on screen for the in-depth book analysis. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.